Now we'll discuss freshwater inflow, what it is, and why it's so important. How much, how, and when freshwater flows into Texas estuaries and bays are the biggest influences on life in these aquatic ecosystems. Galveston Bay, Matagorda Bay, San Antonio Bay, and Corpus Christi Bay are like big mixing bowls where freshwater inflows create salinity gradients that expand and contract with seasons, droughts, tides, and floods. Life in the estuaries has adapted to normal rainfall patterns inland. Estuaries receiving freshwater inflow from East Texas rivers are adapted to higher amounts of freshwater inflow than estuaries in South Texas. Texas's estuaries need higher freshwater inflows during the late spring and early summer. Along with fresh water, the inflows bring nutrients and sediments that feed fish, wildlife, invertebrates, plankton, and wetlands plants. In recent years, freshwater inflows have been lower than biologists consider adequate to maintain highly productive aquatic environments. This has been due to persistent drought conditions and lack of adequate water conservation in Texas's watersheds to maintain enough freshwater flow into the estuaries. The mixing of freshwater with seawater in bays and estuaries varies with the geology, hydrology, and human alterations such as dredging new or deeper channels between the bay and the Gulf. The human-made Port Mansfield Channel is an inlet cut through Padre Island about 30 miles north of the south end of the island. This opening between the Laguna Madre and the Gulf changed water circulation patterns in the lagoon, allowing an exchange of waters between the lagoon and the Gulf in this southern portion of the Laguna Madre. This enhanced the productivity of waters in the lagoon, leading to a greater abundance of red drum, shrimp, flounder, and spotted sea trout, as well as increasing the economic value of sport and commercial fishing in Port Mansfield. The channel also allows boats to now travel between the Laguna Madre and the Gulf in that portion of the lagoon. Tides also have a large and varying effect. Tides are the alternating rise and fall of sea level, which is produced primarily by the combined gravitational attraction of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun on our oceans. These forces are variable, but they are predictable. You can get information about tides from many sources, such as the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the U.S. Department of Commerce. Shown here is a tide chart for Rollover Pass near Galveston, also near the Anahuac National Wildlife Refuge. The heights and timing of tides vary daily as the relative positions of the Earth, the Moon, and the Sun change. As the level of the waters in the Gulf rises, seawater rushes into the bays from the ocean through passes or inlets. As waters reach the highest point, this is called high tide, and the waters rushing in are called the flood tide. At low tide, water that came into the bay during the rising tide rushes back out into the Gulf. This is called the ebb tide. Tides in Texas move up and down on average about 1.5 feet, but sometimes they can vary from low to high by as much as 3 feet. Some days, tidal fluctuation in water height can be very small and on other days large. In other parts of the world, the tide can change up to 30 feet per day. Tides are different depending on exactly where you're located on the Texas coast. What's happening with the tides in Galveston Bay at any point in time will be very different than what's happening in Corpus Christi Bay. Shown here are tide charts for the same day, the upper one near Galveston and the lower at the southern end of South Padre Island near Brownsville. This all creates an extremely varied pattern of inflow and outflow of salt water in our bays and estuaries. Tides and winds help mix the freshwater and saltwater together in the estuaries and bays. Add to this the variability of freshwater inflows from rivers, the hydrology, and any human-caused alterations that affects flows, such as cuts in barrier islands. When you begin to realize that mixing of freshwater and saltwater in Texas bays and estuaries is a very complex subject. Now, it may be complicated, but it's also one of the most important things to understand when studying the productivity of the aquatic ecosystems in bays and estuaries. Shrimp, crabs, oysters, red drum, and spotted sea trout are some of the most familiar species that have adapted to take advantage of these dynamic ecosystems.